Hello everyone, I'm Bruffy1322 and this video will showcase the fastest cars in the GTA 5 SUVs class, organised first of all by race tier and then by lap time within each tier, with the top speed of each vehicle also shown in order to identify any outliers. All 48 SUVs have been put through their paces on my testing track and top speed run, and we'll be going from the slowest M tier cars to the top S tier in this video. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on future testing of new vehicles added to GTA 5 and beyond, and check out all other classes in the playlist. This video is supported by my merch store. Go to store.bruffy.com to browse a wide variety of styles for t-shirts, mugs and more, as well as digital items and the iconic Bruffy Love and G-Fred logo enamel pins. Before we get to the SUVs, first up is the Crusader, which is actually in the military vehicle class and can't be owned or upgraded, but is available to use in the stock lobby selection for SUV races, sitting in the bottom tier. So as we see the slowest cars in the SUVs class, starting with the two Patriots in tier M, it's important for me to let you know that the intro video to this series, which is linked in the description and pinned comment, likely answers any questions you have about this testing. From simple things like what car upgrades are needed to maximise performance and what HSW stands for, to more complicated things like why you use off-road wheels and overall testing methodologies. Give that video a watch if there's anything you don't understand here, since everything there is assumed knowledge for this video. So yeah, we're starting off with two double tiers with M and L. While M wasn't really so interesting because, you know, the Patriot and the Patriot Stretch, the Patriot is generally quicker than the Patriot Stretch, but there's no point in having them separated. The L tier is a lot more interesting, with a bit of a balance between the higher top speed of the Seminole versus the better grip of the Mesa, which, you know, it makes this tier at least a little bit intriguing. But surprisingly, we've got quite large tiers for being all the way down here, at least early on in the class, with 4 cars in every single tier from K, which is where we're at right now, all the way up to H. Now, the two cavalcades that start off the tier K are basically identical. You've got the old model and the new model, but in terms of performance, they're basically identical. You can get a few extra visual modifications on the old one, actually. You know, back in the day, they're both 2013 cars, but it was the only way to, you know, get the car with speakers in the back. You could put those on, whereas the newer model didn't really have that. So that's something at least, but only a few, sort of a tenth of a second ahead of those two cavalcades is the BJ XL, which again, when we're looking down here, we're not looking at very, very quick lap times. The Baller is ultimately the quickest in tier K. Again, this is the old style Baller, but with a 1 minute 18.8 and 100 mph for its top speed, it's going to take a while, especially for the SUVs class, to actually, you know, get up to some decent lap times. The Grizzly is a bit of a spice pick at the start of the J tier. It would be too quick for tier K, so that's why it's here. But the next three sort of have the classic lap time gets better as top speed gets worse, starting with the Habanero, which has a pretty decent top speed, to be honest, but its lap time is a little bit down there, and also the Habanero, you've really got to be careful with it rolling if you take a corner too tight. The FQ2 in the middle of these three is probably the best all-rounder, although you do have to be careful on the brakes because it's not known for its braking prowess. And then the Landstalker in the top spot for this tier. It ultimately has probably the best grip of all three of them and gets the best lap time, but its top speed is again about that 100 mph range and slower than the rest. Tier I is kicked off by the Dubster 2, which is a sort of special different model to the regular Dubster. It's actually called just Dubster in-game, but the only reason it's slower than the regular Dubster, because they're otherwise identical in terms of performance, is that the regular version gets the spare tyre modification on the back which adds traction, whereas the Dubster 2 has that by default and it doesn't give any extra traction because of it. Just ahead of the Dubster 2 is the Landstalker XL, which doesn't go that much quicker than the regular Landstalker, to be honest, and the Seminole Frontier, which again, considering these are, you know, newer versions of old vehicles, doesn't really go that much quicker than the original Seminole. And then we've got our single interloper for the SUVs class, the Park Ranger, which is in the emergency vehicles class but can be used in SUV races and now can be owned and upgraded for SUV races as well. The tops the class basically, but it is big and bulky, so it's not always going to be the best one. Now, tier H, we start off with the Squaddy, which it's kind of on that fringe of whether it was tier H or tier I. Ultimately, it was decently quick enough to be put into tier H, but it is the slowest in here. Nevertheless, it's got some. It's quite fun to drive the Squaddy, I would say. So it can be one of the nicer ones in this tier. We've got the big bulky Granger, which is basically just very like the Park Ranger that we saw earlier, up next, and then after that we've got the regular Dubster, and that shows the difference in lap time between having a spoiler on the Dubster and not having a spoiler, though, because ultimately, apart from that spoiler difference, the two Dubsters that we've seen in this video are identical, but the extra spoiler gives it that better lap time. And finally, the Serrano tops the tier with a 1:15.3, so we're still nowhere near really decent lap times at this point. Are we going to get there with tier G? Well, we start off with the Rakoto, which has a decent lap time. We take a bit of a jump to 1:15.0, and we will get into the 1:14s very shortly, but it's also got that decent top speed of 107.75, at least relative to the things around it, in comparison to the Radius, which is a couple of miles per hour down, but a few tenths of a second quicker for lap time. So the Radius is going to be all about the grip, whereas the Rakoto is going to be more about the straight line speed. And then the XLS finishes off tier G with a 1:14.5. It's only a tenth quicker than the Radius. It's kind of the best all-rounder, mixing the top speed with the grip, whereas the Radius has all the grip and the Rakoto is more about that top speed. Now it's time for the baller tier with tier F. We've started off with the slightly off-pace LE LWB Armoured, which is a bit of a spice pick for this tier, alongside a car that's trying so hard to fit in, but it's clearly not making it work, with the Granger 3600 LX. Again, another spice pick for the tier because it's really let down basically by that 5th worst in the class top speed. Again, another new version of an old vehicle that's not really doing much else. The other three cars in this tier are basically all the same for performance, there or thereabouts, with the Baller LE LWB non-armoured version first of all, the Baller LE armoured version, and then the good old-fashioned regular Baller, all separated by less than 0.2 of a second and having identical top speeds. Ballers make up 1/6 of the entire SUV's class, with 8 cars in total out of 48, and basically the F tier is a focal point of that. You can choose any of these 3 ballers that are at the top of the tier because they're basically very similar on performance. Or if you want to go for, you know, a slightly slower baller, you've got the LE LWB armoured at the bottom, or you can just go completely off the wall and do a Granger 3600 LX in this one. And just when you thought it was all over with the ballers, the slightly quicker LE non-armoured version is up next, kicking off the E tier as a bit of a spice pick basically, because leaving it out of the F tier makes multiple cars available at the top of that one, rather than this one just being the one to choose. Just ahead of this, we've got the newer Illusion, which has the best top speed of all the vehicles here in this, of the 3 vehicles in tier E, but not as good in the corners. But most of the time for E-tier SUV races, you're going to want to use one of the nicest cars in the entire SUV's class to drive, the Huntley S. I've always liked this car. It used to be the #1 SUV back in the day, taking the top spot away from, you know, the regular old baller, but at least it's still got some relevance in tier E, and just a lovely car to drive. Now tier D has 2 cars separated by exactly 0.3 of a second, with the Dorado having the slightly worse lap time but the better top speed, in comparison to the slightly better around the lap but worse top speed armoured XLS. Now this XLS is the only example of an armoured version of a car in this game being quicker than the regular version, and it's kind of strange that happened, but it's only just because for whatever reason Rockstar decided to give it a little bit more powerful engine and a bit more grip. Don't know why, but it's the quicker version out of the 2. Now the new Cavalcade XL kicks off the C tier, but more of a spice pick due to its sort of lackluster top speed. Despite being quite nice to drive, it's just not that quick. It doesn't have that grunt a lot in the straights. Just ahead of it is another big car that is arguably shouldn't even be in the SUV's class, with the Contender. Now this has great acceleration and that's able to negate the fairly middling top speed, but it is probably the best all-rounder out of the bunch, given that a car with big top speed and no grip is up next with the Issy Rally. Now this really struggles in the corners, but the top 10 in class top speed really helps it keep pace, and tier C would probably give some of the most interesting races given the difference in cars here. because topping the C tier is the electric iWagon, which is great on acceleration compared to the cars around it, but that woeful top speed means it has the biggest discrepancy between lap time and top speed position in the class, and is the worst in the class overall for top speed. Just something to be aware of in case you ever want to choose it. Now, the three cars in the B tier are separated by 3/10 and comprise the electric DiNmiTe, which is good on acceleration and grip, but struggles for top end, the Baller ST, which is probably the pick in this tier for most racers given its all-round performance between lap time and top speed, and the Jubilee at the top of the tier, which struggles in the corners but has the best top speed of the bunch. Now, different tracks are going to play to the strengths of each car in this tier, probably more so than any other apart from really this tier C that we just saw. So, you really have to be tuned into what kind of track you're going to be racing on to make sure that you make the right choice out of these three. You can always play it safe and you'll always be on pace with the Baller ST, but sometimes, depending on the track, you might want to go with a bit better top speed Jubilee or the better acceleration DiNmiTe. So we've got a pretty incredible top two tiers in SUVs. The S and the A tiers combined consist of the top 9 cars in the class for lap time and the top 9 for top speed, just not in the same order. The Aston Custom starts us off for the A tier, and alongside the Rebel GTS, which you're going to see next, are both, I would say, spice picks for the tier. They're both very good in their own right and, nice cars to drive. It's just that they're a little bit off the pace from the rest of the cars in the tier, not by much, and if you prefer driving these vehicles in particular, you can just use them. The Aston Custom, especially if HSW is turned off, you can just use that and not need to worry about any other A tier vehicle, but they are just a little bit off the pace. Now, the regular Aston, which is going to be up next, is probably the most consistent and easiest to manage vehicle for this tier. Probably the best all-rounder, as it combines a pretty good lap time. We're finally into the 106s, the 105, under the 106 mark, with a relatively decent top speed as well. 7th place for the Aston for both lap time and top speed, the first one to match its position for both. And then we've got the Issy Rally, which is the #1 vehicle in the class for top speed at 138 miles per hour. The HSW version of the Issy Rally is absolutely crazy, but again, I can't stress enough, just like before, how much of a struggle the corners are with the Issy Rally. It has no grip and severe understeer, and it's made even worse by it being a HSW upgraded version, so that's why it's only in the A tier. The top of the A tier is the Novak, just a little bit ahead, but it's also got some of those bouncy advanced flags, so it isn't the nicest to drive, but it has some good grip and it does gain a lot from the curb boosts as well, so it's nice if you can handle it. Now, even though the Toros is our first S tier vehicle, it is one of the single worst driving experiences in the entire game due to all the bouncy advanced flags that it has. I would rather take an A tier car than take the Toros, honestly. You'll probably do better over the course of a race just through not crashing as much. So, the Toros is quick when it wants to be, and we've taken a big jump in lap time into the 104s, and it's got a great top speed as well. But getting that lap time out of it will be a bit of a challenge, and honestly also requires some luck too on more bumpy tracks. A much better pick for the top of the class is the new Baller STD, which falls into 3rd place overall for lap time. Now, on old gen platforms or new gen races with HSW turned off, this is easily the pick, given it's significantly more consistent than the Toros and almost 1.5 seconds quicker than the best that the A tier has to offer. With great grip and acceleration, it only lacks a little bit in top speed in comparison to the cars around it. Nevertheless, it's a lovely SUV to drive and very competitive in the top tier. But it's how Special works that steals the show once again, with the top 2 cars having that immense HSW straight line performance and ultimately only being separated by less than 1/10 of a second. We start with the HSW Aston Custom, which is probably one of my favourite cars to drive in the game. It's only 2 miles per hour down on the HSW Issy Rally to have the 2nd highest top speed in the class, and it uses that speed to great effect with just enough traction to put a lap time down that's almost half a second quicker than the Baller that we just saw. And only a fraction faster than that is the HSW DiNmiTe. Now, with it being an HSW electric vehicle, it has superb acceleration and slightly better grip than the Aston Custom, but it's almost 10 miles per hour down on top speed. Given the top 2 are separated by 0.08 of a second, it's really your choice which one you pick based on your driving preferences or the track type. For example, a track with a lot of long straights will suit the Astron Custom, whereas a lot of stop-start corners will suit the DiNmiTe. And then on more traction limited circuits, the Baller STD will come into play with its decent grip. So there's really a nice balance at the top of the SUVs class at the moment, and it's really refreshing that the top tier is no longer just the awful to drive Toros. And with a wide variety of cars to use in some pretty close tiers all the way down the order, SUVs is a bit of a hidden gem of a class for racing. We've got all sorts of tiers down here that you can restrict yourself to, even all the way down to the K tier, and L even at the very start had two cars that were fairly well balanced, one having better top speed, one having better lap time. When you look at the top two here with the DiNmiTe and the Astron Custom, you see how closely matched they are. And then you've got the Baller STD, which is only just behind them. Considering it's not an HSW car, it does really well. And, in so many different ways that you can restrict yourself to certain vehicles and have great races with all sorts of different cars having different performances. But despite there being a big differential in lap time and top speed from the very top to the very bottom of the class, it seems like the cars still group themselves together quite well, which is really nice to see. And obviously in the comparisons here right at the end, we're seeing the crazy top speeds of HSW cars put through their paces, and you can see that difference between the Astron Custom and the DiNmiTe. If the track has significantly long straights, or even a medium amount of long straights or high top speed sections, the Astron Custom is going to become the best. But yeah, I don't think there's any situations really where the Issy Rally is going to be the best in a racing situation. It's just really that bad in the corners, despite having that great top speed, and that is obviously where the Baller STD lacks a little bit. So lots of different variations of vehicles in this one, lots to keep in mind. That's everything for this video. Please consider supporting on Patreon or become a YouTube member if you want to support this work and get some extra perks for doing so, such as early access to videos and other testing results. Also remember to read the description for more info, comment with your thoughts, like the video if you enjoyed or found it helpful, and subscribe for more. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.